Hey, good evening. This is Mitch Payne, and this is my presentation on leader development with my leader interview for the leader development class. For my interview, I had the privilege of interviewing a pastor who's well known in the Midwest and Kansas City area, Pastor Steve Dighton. He's been in ministry for over 45 years, and most notably in 1990, he planted the Lenexa Baptist Church. And so, over the next 25 years, he served as a senior pastor of Lenexa Baptist, growing it from a very small church plant to the largest church in the Kansas City area with regular attendance of over 3,000. In 2015, he retired from that position and passed the mantle of leadership on to the church's next leader, instead serving as a senior pastor emeritus of Lenexa Baptist. Now, of course, he's not the kind of person who's content to rest on his laurels, and so he pivoted from serving as a senior pastor to working in church revitalization. In that role, until current time, he has worked with over a dozen churches, developing leaders, helping them establish structures, helping those churches get back on a healthy track. And continuing to just be an influence and mentor to leaders throughout the entire Kansas City and Midwest area. In 2022, Midwestern Seminary named one of their two endowed chairs after him, as when they announced the Steve and Mary Dighton Endowed Chair of Pastoral Ministry, which in my mind really couldn't have gone to a more appropriate leader in the area, cementing his legacy in leadership and leadership development for the church in the Kansas City area. It's actually in the context of his church revitalization that I first met him. In 2021, he had just taken over as interim pastor for a small church in Basehor, Kansas. My wife and I we were still in the military, and we were moved to the Fort Leavenworth area, and we started attending Basehor First Baptist that summer. Over the next 2 years, I had the privilege of sitting at his feet and learning from him. He's been an incredible mentor to me. He helped me develop me and put me in positions where I could continue to grow as a leader in the church. I was able to preach multiple occasions in the church, as well as regularly teach Sunday school, theology classes, filling in for him both in the pulpit and in Bible studies throughout the week. My wife was also heavily involved. She was hired as a children's minister at the church, and we're continually and joyfully attending that church until the Army moved us in 2023. Despite that, I've maintained continual contact with Pastor Steve, and he's continued to be an influence and mentor to me, particularly as I look to transition out of the military and into church planting in the Kansas City area. So it is my fervent hope that I get a chance to continue working with him and learning from him. For the interview itself, I conducted the interview on 7 July. It was supposed to be a 20-minute interview, and it went about an hour and 20 minutes because he loves to talk and I love to talk, and I just genuinely enjoy listening to what he has to say. Throughout the interview, I asked 5 questions. The first couple were some of the prepositioned questions from the prompt itself. The last 3 were ones that I was decidedly interested in as someone who's looking to do church planting in the very near future. So I asked him, hey, in your pastoral experience, what have you learned about leadership and leadership development? And the very first thing he does is cite Maxwell. He says leadership is influence. And he says, in general, just to be a leader of anything, you have to have the ability to influence others. And as a pastor, you have to influence them in positive ways. Now, the ability to do that, he says, is built on this idea of who you are as a person. And so you have to be authentic. He's like, there are times when I would tell people things and they just wouldn't want to hear it, or they'd rub them the wrong way. But that was far more effective than sugarcoating something or putting on a facade, because people will see through hypocrisy so much quicker, and you will lose any influence you have with them if you were continuing to be a hypocrite rather than being authentic and transparent with people. And then lastly, and this is really evident from what I saw in his life over the last 6-7 years that I've known him. He says pastoral leadership is all about people. You have to love your people. They have to know that they are heard, that they are loved, that you have to engage with your people, be affirming and encouraging and empathetic. And I asked him, how does that mesh with being a pastor for a mega church? And he's like, that's a great question. You have to be, deliberate in the people that you influence, and just be deliberate in the time that you spend with people. You have to be very intentional about that. It's not to say you have to pick and choose certain people, but because I think everyone that's worked with Pastor Steve knows that he loves people. But in his ability to continue to influence and develop people, that intentionality was pretty important. Speaking of intentional mentorship, I asked him, the next question I asked him was, hey, who were some mentors for you as you were coming up as a pastor? He gave me a name, O.S. Hawkins, who's been a mentor. He said he's been a mentor to him for years. He's taught me a lot about leadership. O.S. Hawkins, for those who may not be familiar, was a senior pastor, a seminary president, and a CEO of a financial company, I believe. What was so fascinating about that was that he clearly admitted that he and OS did not agree on everything. He's like, hey, I picked and chose the best things I could. And I learned what I could from him, about structure, organization, strategy. But there are some things that he did that I wouldn't have done. And that, I think, reflects what he was saying earlier about authenticity. You can't make a carbon copy of people as leaders. They've got to grow into their own leadership styles. And so you can learn a lot from mentors, even if you use different approaches. The third question I asked, 3, 4, 5, and 6 were really more focused on things that I was concerned about or interested in as a potential church planner. So I asked him, like, hey, when you're as a pastor, what did you look for in potential elders and deacons? Of course, as a man of God who's been in the ministry for 45 years, the first thing he says is, hey, I looked, basically, did they meet the qualifications in Timothy and Titus? After they've met those qualifications, the thing he said that he looked for is, did they have conviction? Did they really believe the gospel and have it change their lives? But he said this conviction's got to be balanced with common sense, because some people who believe can become overzealous and judgmental. And going back to what he said about church being a people effort, you need people who can balance their convictions with common sense and empathy. And then, continuing that pragmatic vein, he says, the thing I look for in people is, are they good team players? Are they someone I want to play ball with? Are they someone who's going to help me move this church along, either without getting too far ahead of the leadership or, lagging too far behind? I also asked him, hey, have you ever had to fire an elder or a deacon? And if so, what happened? And he related to me 2 stories. First was a deacon who sadly was caught up into an extramarital affair with another deacon's wife. In doing so, he blew up his personal life, he blew up his marriage, he blew up his ministry, his family. And Pastor Steve, he was doing, he told me, he's like, hey, he was doing all the right things. And he relayed to me that, sometimes we just live in a fallen world and people are going to make bad decisions and you can't control all of those things. People have an inner life, they're susceptible to sin. And so the only solution to prevent that as leaders and developing those people is continual accountability. The second circumstance that he relayed to me was in his church revitalization role. He was about to hand the reins off to a younger senior pastor, and he had this uneasy feeling where this guy's personality, it wasn't a character flaw, but it was a personality mismatch. And he didn't quite say it in these terms, but he was talking about leader personality and organizational culture and how those two didn't work. So he ended up having to talk with the elders and remove that person from consideration as senior pastor. It was a difficult decision. Some people didn't like that, but fundamentally, it was the right decision, because I guess that senior pastor went to a different place and they had a similar personality mismatch, and it didn't end well for that church. And so he was able to save this other church from some hardship. And that's where, we talked about, like, hey, what kind of leadership development things could you have done to prevent that? And he mentioned, if it's a personality mismatch, like, fundamentally something's got to change. One of the 2 things has got to give, and it's probably going to be the pastor, because it's a lot easier to change one person than the entire culture of an organization. The last question I asked him was what he saw as the relationship between leader development and church planting. particularly from him as a pastor of a megachurch with multiple campuses. He looked at that and said, hey, every campus should eventually become its own church plant, self-sufficient. And so you've got to raise up leaders, and it can't just be pastors, but it's got to be the deacons and the elders and the structure to do that. And if you can't train them, you got to hire the right people. But of course, that turned into, again, the pragmatic side. It's like with all church plants, resources are tight. Uh, Money is a finite resource, and so you've got to be judicious in how you use it to make sure you get the right people. And in church planning, particularly networking becomes critically important, because that network of leaders that you've developed over time are people that you can continue to rely on. So that kind of summed up kind of the conversation we had. It absolutely was a privilege to sit and talk with him for such an extended period of time. And I'm going to dinner with him out, this coming week in a couple of days, and I look forward to continuing that conversation. But thank you for the chance to kind of listen to what I said.